Hello and thank you to Inroads for this incredible opportunity. Thank you to all those here in attendance today. I'm so grateful to be your keynote speaker. My name is Nick Valencia, and I am an Atlanta based CNN national correspondent. And still 10 years later, after having that title as a correspondent at CNN, I still have to pause, to reflect on that and what it took to get here. It was always the dream to be a national correspondent, but there were certainly moments throughout the process that I didn't think it was going to come true. I remember the age I fell in love with journalism. I actually remember the moment that it was cemented in me that I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. I was 16 years old. I was covering our boys' varsity basketball team as the sports editor for my high school newspaper. And I was with my dad in the stands. And I was upset at him that day because I had just gotten my learner's permit and he wouldn't let me drive to the game. So I'm sitting in the stands taking notes and I feel someone's eyes trained on me. I look back and it's my dad. And I was upset at him, remember? So I remember looking back on him and snapping on him, with that teenage angst and just being like, what? What do you want? What are you looking at? And with only the love a father can have for his son, he said, Nicholas, I just love watching you do what you're meant to do. I don't think I realized at the time how special those words were. I remember, being blank faced and sort of completely disarmed by his love. And I think about that every single day. It was a few months after that experience that my dad suddenly died. It was 2 weeks before I graduated high school, and at arguably one of the most pivotal points in my life. My dad was my very best friend, and he was gone. I remember at the time knowing that I had two options. I could either drown myself in the sadness and just give up. And I think at the time, considering how young I was and what happened to me, no one really would have held it against me. And the second thing I could have done is what I did do is I kept going forward and I kept pressing forward. I felt like a part of me died that day with him. And rather than give up, though, I chose to face my sadness head on. I got into the University of Southern California and was able to put myself through USC by myself. I paid my own way. It's something that I'm still incredibly proud of. But despite that accomplishment, the whole time, I felt like I didn't belong. Being around affluent white kids from Orange County, some of whose family members were either household names or USC legacies, I just felt out of place. I felt like I wasn't good enough. My family is middle class. I grew up in a middle class household, and to some of the poorer kids on the block, they really looked up to my family. But compared to families outside of Northeast LA, we were barely making it. My family was looked up to because we had two parents in the household. I wasn't a latchkey kid. My dad used to tell me that you're good as the best and better than most. But through part of USC, I often felt like I didn't belong. I felt that uncomfortableness often, and I let that uncomfortableness fuel me. And by the end of it, my senior year, I'd graduated near the top of my class in the journalism school, one of the most prestigious journalism schools in the country. I felt after graduation that I was one of the most talented journalists that USC had farmed out that year. And I remember that feeling stayed with me after graduation, even as I saw classmate after classmate get jobs before me. 8 months after college, I was still looking for a job. In fact, I'd moved back home and I was living in my mom's basement, and I found a job at a local bookstore. And I remember some kids from my high school would come in and look at me and give me a sort of double take and say, "Weren't you just at USC? Didn't you just graduate at the top of your class?" I felt the judgment. I felt the embarrassment. And to make matters worse, at the time, because of all the stress and all the depression, I broke out with a face full of acne. I never really had a problem with acne in high school, so it was a hell of a time for me to go through this just as I was trying to get my first job on air. I was so embarrassed and depressed about the way I looked. There were days that I wouldn't leave the household during the day. I would only come out at night just because I was so embarrassed by how I looked. I was so depressed at the time, thinking I was supposed to be somewhere I wasn't, that I started hanging out with people I shouldn't have. I grew up in Northeast LA, which was it was a pretty violent, intense place in the '90s, and my mom did a lot to keep me safe from cholos, which are Mexican gangsters. Fast forward to a few months out of college, it's those same cholos that I was hanging out with, drinking 40 ounces and getting high with them every day, and that's what I was living for. And I remember one day my brother he took me for a drive, and I don't remember exactly what happened that day, but I do remember being parked in front of my mom's house and him telling me that I wasn't living up to what my dad had instilled in me. He reminded me that greatness is measured by how much it takes to discourage you. I remember letting out a big cry and giving my brother a hug and telling him, thank you. And the next day, I started applying for jobs again. I started running. I started moving my life into action. And then one day, I got a call from my cousin, who happened to be on a plane from Los Angeles to Atlanta with a CNN radio correspondent, who, as she got on the plane, tripped and fell, and her badge came out of her purse. It was such a serendipitous flight that she ended up sitting next to him, and the person that sat at the window was the husband of her high school best friend who she hadn't seen since high school. It was my into CNN. My cousin talked me up so much that she took the resume that I had already applied to the job, an entry-level job, and she put it on the top of the pile at the CNN recruiter's desk. And I remember being 22 years old on February 14, 2006, when CNN called and offered me a job as an entry-level employee, a teleprompter operator. Since coming to Atlanta, I've become one of only a handful of employees in the 40-year history at CNN to rise from the rank of entry-level employee to on-air correspondent. I've faced adversity at CNN as well, and there's certainly been moments when I felt like I didn't belong. But if there's something that I can tell you today to save you the suffering that I went through, it's to tell you that you belong in any room where your feet are planted. You are as good as the best and better than most. And in the face of adversity, you must remember that greatness is measured by how much it takes to discourage you. Go out and be great. With the help of organizations like Inroads, underrepresented talent in this country is getting exactly that opportunity. Thank you again to Inroads and to all of you for listening today. God bless you.